Good morning. So, like Naresh said, it was 20 years ago in 2005 when we were part of the group that organized the first one in first Agile conference in a university campus, I think, if I remember right, in Bangalore. And I, as a developer at that time, so my first 10 years or so of my career was I was a techie. Uh, and yeah, as a developer, we didn't have any AI coding assistants at that time, not even Stack Overflow, but Google used to work. And yeah, I remember because I had worked in a few places earlier on, but this was my first introduction to pair programming, test driven development, continuous integration. We were excited about doing all those things back then. Um, but how things have changed over the last 20 years, right? So it feels great and a bit nostalgic as well. Today, the topic that I'm covering and the things that I'm going to say, I think you will agree with many of these points. But some of you might feel that you are not in a position to make these things happen in your organization. Because typically I present this to a CFO or a COO audience, and they are in a much better position to, like, if they agree with it, they are in a much better position to do something about it. So if you find yourself in that position, then maybe you can think of it as, like, if you agree with it, maybe you can think of it as how you can pitch it to them or to those who report to them. So I arrived at impact intelligence through my journey of consulting on agile transformation and digital transformation, and I started this since around 2011. And after a while of doing this transformation consulting, I realized that we should not be labeling uh, a transformation as a success merely because we have introduced new ways of working or introduced a new operating model, like going from project to product, or even introducing new digital channels or capabilities in the market. I mean, those things are great and those things are necessary in their own right, but did it really translate to business impact? Did it improve any of these metrics? And yes, those metrics might have improved during the time that these efforts were going on, but then are we sure that it improved because of these efforts? And do we know what the contribution was? What was the contribution of these efforts to the improvement in those metrics? So when I talk to leaders about these topics, they say, okay, we might not be able to demonstrate a direct linkage to business impact, but there are other metrics that we can demonstrate. There are other metrics that we can say have improved. That's one line of reasoning. And they also say that linking it all the way to business impact is not really under my control. I don't control enough of the things to demonstrate business impact. Some others also say that I don't have the authority or the resources to do so. And a third set of people actually challenge me, saying that of course it's going to result in business impact. It's logical that if you do all these things, ultimately it's going to have business impact. Our job is to focus on the process and the outcome will take care of itself. Now, I don't think this is true, especially for it. This might be true in certain very specific contexts, but when it comes to technology initiatives, business initiatives, transformation initiatives, it's not enough to just focus on the process and assume that the outcome will take care of itself. In fact, I think that's been a little bit of the problem with Agile, where perhaps we have focused a little too much only on the process side and not enough on the business impact side of things. So I think it's necessary to focus on the process, but also independently focus on the outcome and make sure that the processes that you're following is indeed translating into business impact, and if not, investigate why not. So when I say measure and iterate, it might ring a bell in your head. You might feel like, oh, this is build, measure, learn all over again. But actually, I go beyond that a little bit, but more on that in a moment. And this is necessary because increasingly money for all these efforts is not as easy as it used to be. Investors and shareholders are increasingly asking, what are we getting for it? What's the business impact, right? Earlier it used to be that, oh, you say, oh, of course you got to spend on transformation, right? Or you're going to be disrupted. And of course we got to move to the cloud or things like that. And the budgets were available, but increasingly this is not the case. Money is tight, funding is scarce, and everything has to be justified in terms of business impact, whether it's a transformation initiative, business initiative, technology initiative. And then it's not only about the big ticket initiatives, it's not only about like the huge ones. Large organizations might decide to do hundreds of small and medium initiatives, and they add up. Ultimately, it adds up to the capital expenditure outlay that they have for the year. So, so it's not just for big initiatives. To illustrate my point, I'm going to share a couple of examples. They are not transformation initiatives, they are more in the business initiatives category, but I think you'll be able to map it to your context. So let's take the example of a credit card division at a bank, and they have a bunch of customer support channels, right? They have the call center, of course, but they also have a mobile app and a website. But as a new initiative, they might decide, let's invest in an AI chatbot, and by doing so, we will we will enable self-service even more than earlier. And if that happens, then even as the business grows, we might be able to do with the current level of headcount in the call center, right? So that's the business justification with which they might decide to invest in a chatbot like this, so to grow the business without growing the headcount in the call center. Now, okay, this is all well and good. On this basis, an initiative like this gets funded. What is the measure of success though, right? In my experience, in the lowest maturity organizations, delivery tends to be the measure of success. So I understand delivery itself tends to be a challenge in many places, but the lowest maturity organizations, they deliver it and they call it a success. We've delivered the chatbot, yay, great, done. We've delivered on the mission, right? The next level maturity, which is where I think majority of the organizations are today, in the middle, they track the performance of the chatbot itself, right? So they track the number of satisfactory chatbot sessions, and they use that as a basis for judging the success of the initiative. Yeah. But very few companies have the means or even the desire to go beyond this and actually track, did it really save call volume, right? The reason with which we funded this initiative, did that really happen? And you might say, but of course, that's isn't it a given? Like if you're having so many chatbot sessions, successful ones, then isn't that going to translate to savings? It might, but it might not. For example, what might be happening is you might find that the people who are already using the website and the mobile to service themselves, the mobile app, now with the introduction of the chatbot, instead of navigating through the website or the mobile app, navigating through the menus and getting stuff done, they might be using the AI chatbot. So then in that case, all we have done is we have sort of reshuffled the service, self-service. So instead of self-service happening through channel A, it is now happening through channel B, right? There might not be a net impact on call volumes unless we actually track it and figure it out. So I call this as tracking proximate impact versus tracking downstream impact. Yeah, I'll use these terms consistently. This is core to the concept of impact intelligence that I'm putting forward. So proximate impact is, impact that is very close to what you're doing and something that you can more easily measure. It tends to be in the realm of product analytics or service analytics. Downstream impact is usually closer to tangible business impact. It's harder to track because there might be many things contributing to downstream impact. It's not just the chat bot, right? Call savings or call volume is a function of many variables. So it's harder to track, but nevertheless, in today's climate where funding is scarce, it's become all the more important to track this and to demonstrate business impact in terms of downstream impact. Yeah. So I'll get to how do we do this in a second, but one more example to illustrate the point. There's a different sort of business. Let's take a video streaming business like Netflix or Jio Hotstar or something like that. And for the purpose of this example, let's say they are in an early stage. The product is not fully mature. They're still building out capabilities. And let's say the person who is in charge of growing market share has this idea that, okay, we have penetrated the sort of the mature markets, but we want to expand to say the low bandwidth regions. Yeah. And so we say, okay, if you want to expand to low bandwidth regions, maybe we need to have offline viewing capability in our product. And to further strengthen their justification, they might say that by doing this, we'll also appeal to the frequent flyer segment, yeah, so that you can watch on flights. And they might make up their justification on this basis and say, and therefore we ought to invest in this offline viewing capability, yeah. And these justifications are required because this is not a trivial capability. The technical work required is one thing, but also, you know, for something like this, they might have to renegotiate their licensing rights with the content providers, because typically licensing rights, you know, the licensing rights for streaming might be different from the rights for offline viewing. Yeah. So all in all, there are, you know, there is a bunch of change involved on the business side, on the technical side as well. So it's not something that you can take lightly and say, okay, let's do it and see, right? Because there is significant investment of business resources. So again, how do we track the success of something like this? What is the measure of success? Clearly, just delivery is not a measure of success, but most organizations, since this is kind of a digital native use case, organizations are slightly more mature when it comes to examples like this. So they would definitely track offline viewing hours, right? So what is the uptake of this is a measure of the uptake of the feature, right? It's a measure of feature adoption, you know, offline viewing hours. Okay, that's great, but most startups or unicorns or digital natives, they stop here. They don't go to the next stage and say, we justified this feature on the basis of greater market share, appealing to the frequent flyer segment and so on. Did that really happen? Do we have the capabilities in place and the mechanisms in place to figure out if that has really happened? And to what extent has this feature contributed to the growth in market share or the growth in retention among the frequent flyer segment? That's again downstream impact. And if we don't do these things, if we just keep building feature on feature based on faith that yes, it's going to, because logically it makes sense that it's going to have some business impact. And if we, so then what happens is we are basically in some ways I would argue that we are, I thought there was a laser pointer here, but maybe not. Okay. So in some ways we are flying blind if we don't track downstream impact, and we keep delivering lots of stuff. It has unclear commercial benefit. But never mind, there are more ideas to try out, so more work gets funded. It's kind of a vicious loop. And meanwhile, you have to maintain everything, run everything that you've built. So the run cost keeps increasing, the maintenance costs keep increasing, and it's a budget bloat. And sooner or later, there are questions about ROI, like why are we asking for 10% more tech budget every year? And also the CTO finds that, you know, all that extra budget is not available to develop new capabilities. Increasingly a bigger slice of it has to be diverted to maintaining the existing capabilities, because the size of the run landscape is increasing. And that's unsustainable, especially nowadays it's unsustainable because it's the CTO who has to justify this, even though they might be just delivering what the business has asked them to deliver. When the time comes for the budget conversation, it is they who have to justify the increased tech spend. So I see these as symptoms of poor impact intelligence. Yeah, the fact that what you are delivered, we don't have good intel into its business impact, And the fact that the based on sort of okay-ish justification, things are getting funded, and there is not more a little more rigorous justification. I see those as symptoms, and I'll shortly talk about how I think we can address those symptoms. So yes, how to progress towards. So far it was more of an articulation of the problem statement. So now I progress to articulating a solution that I call impact intelligence. So the first step in my opinion is to create awareness that there are different levels of outcome. Nowadays everybody feels they are outcome oriented, that they are leading outcome oriented teams, they are working towards outcomes, but they mean different outcomes in their heads. Some people might think of delivery as an outcome, and true, delivery is an outcome, but it's a delivery outcome, it's far away from a business outcome. Others might, a CTO might think, I migrated to the cloud, that's a great outcome. Yes, it is a great outcome, but in terms of business impact, you have to demonstrate that by doing so, did it lower the cost of operations, right? You might have reduced your technology procurement lead time, but did that really help speed up time to market for the business? Those linkages, it's up to us to establish from the lower level outcomes to the business outcomes that matter. Yeah. A product manager might think feature adoption is a great outcome. Whatever they built got adopted, like offline viewing hours, right? We build the offline viewing capability, it got adopted. I can see like thousands of offline viewing hours, great. But did that really translate to the business outcome with which it was funded in terms of, reaching the low bandwidth market areas, retaining the frequent flyer segment and so on? Did it happen? So that the first step is to make people aware that there is this, and I think there is in your context, in your business, there's going to be a similar hierarchy of outcomes that you can come up with. The first step is to create awareness that this is the case, and to talk about the potential linkages, like how do we expect the lower level outcomes to actually link up to the higher level outcomes, right? Because that is why we are doing those things. But what are those linkages? Typically, these things are there in the heads of senior business stakeholders. If it's a startup, it is there in the head of a founder or the co-founder, but I have experienced that it is not there across the organization. When you go to the lower levels of the organization, the individual contributors and so on, these linkages are not established. And therefore, it's worthwhile to create a map of these linkages. It's like a matrix map, but I call it an impact network because I have prescribed some additional rules and conventions of how to go about building a map like this, where all the nodes represent metrics, but the lower level, at the bottom you have the lower level metrics, like the number of successful chat sessions or the number of offline viewing hours. Those are the lower level metrics. They are typically the product or the service analytics. At the top, you have the key business metrics that matter. So in terms of revenue, customer satisfaction, retention, churn, and so on. And in the middle, you have the linking metrics. Like in the chatbot example, the call volume is a linking metric. It links the effect of the AI chatbot on call volume and the effect of reduced call volume on operating costs in the call center, right? So at the bottom, you have proximate impact. At the top, as you move towards the top, you're moving towards downstream impact. So I think this takes a few iterations among key business stakeholders to arrive at a map like this. But in my experience, wherever I have done this, at the end of it, it's created a lot of value. People agree that, okay, we weren't necessarily seeing it the same way. And so this effort has now helped us arrive at a consensus of how these things actually link up together. And of course, this is not a fixed artifact. You arrive at a version 1.0. and then you be prepared to keep evolving it as your business changes, as you come up with new ideas to implement and so on. So this is what it might look like for the first example of an AI chatbot, where we are adding one more channel of self-service at the bottom, and so that's going to result in some more self-service capture, which will have a positive impact on call volume, which helps reduce the variable costs in the contact center, which in turn contributes positively to overall operating costs. Yeah. So it can have any number of levels depending on the complexity of your domain. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say about this particular example. Let's move on to the next example, the offline viewing hours and the video streaming. Over here, So the video streaming business revenue is a function of number of subscribers and ad revenue, right? If they have ad supported plans, ad revenue is going to be a component of the overall revenue. Oh, okay, the boxes moved a little, sorry about that. I tried to highlight the path. So paying subscribers, of course, as people churn, that's going to reduce paying subscribers, and voluntary churn is something that we can control, or we can try to control, where by making sure that people are engaged on the platform. And in this particular business, engagement is typically a function of the hours of content they are consuming on a weekly basis, the number of titles they are watching, and the frequency of visits to the platform. Yeah. So that's the overall impact network for this part of the business, and the offline viewing feature is expecting to influence those two boxes at the bottom. It's expecting to influence primarily the hours and maybe the number of visits, through that engagement and through that some impact on churn. I haven't shown the parts about the expanded market share and so on, because for that you'll have to maybe segment the paying subscribers, or you can do it at the bottom here. Yeah, but you get the picture. So far I have not overlaid the initiatives, the things we are going to do, but now I am moving from just visualizing impact to actually validating impact. Yeah. So to do that, the first step is we overlay the initiatives, the things that we plan to do, they are at the bottom here, and the expectation is that by doing this thing, we expect this metric out here to move. By doing the second thing, we expect the second metric to move, all well and good. But it is all in service of trying to move that metric at the top, right? That is the tangible business impact. So now, typically what happens is when we do business reviews for initiatives, we do it one at a time. So like there is a review for this initiative, this initiative, this initiative. And at that point, the review is mostly in terms of, okay, I moved the needle on this metric, right? Because it's very difficult to have the conversation about that metric over there, because there are so many contributors. So the review ends up just discussing proximate impact. However, when you have this picture in place, you have the option of validating benefits outside in. So the person who is in charge of that metric over there, once a quarter they say, okay, I have observed a 5% improvement at that level. What can I attribute that to? Is that because of external factors, or is that because of these initiatives? And if so, which initiative contributed how much to moving the needle by 5% over there, right? That is a very powerful conversation. That conversation hardly ever happens. I have not seen that happening. There are a few very good companies that are in pockets of, say, Amazon, Booking.com, etc. These things happen, but otherwise it doesn't. And so we'll see an example of having gone through this process for, let's say, the AI chatbot. The end output might look like this. So I'll talk through that a little bit. So the head of customer operations, who is very interested in the call volume metric, might report on one particular day, he might report that, you know, the quarter on quarter change for this metric. So call volumes, he might report that call volumes have gone up by 2.4%, you know, this quarter compared to last quarter. And that has happened despite a 4% increase in the customer base, because it's a living business, customer base is growing. So that's good news, right? Because as a simplifying assumption, we can say that as the customer base grows, the call volume is expected to grow. So if the customer base has gone up by 4%, everything else constant, you would expect the call volume to also have gone up by 4%, right? But instead of that, we are observing that it has gone up only by 2.4%. So that's a savings of 1.6%, right? So what can we attribute that savings to? Is all of that because of an improvement in self-service? Maybe yes, maybe no. But if they talk to their data team, the data analysts might say that, you know, there is seasonality, every quarter is not the same. So because of seasonality, 60 basis points can be, you know, taken away, can be attributed to seasonality. So what you have left is about 1% or 100 basis points that is left to attribute. Maybe we can attribute that to self-service as an approximation. Yeah. So you have 1% of credit to claim as self-service, right? It was improvements in self-service that led to 1% improvement. Okay, but which self-service channel? So that is the next level of attribution, to say, okay, was all of that 1% because of the virtual assistant? Maybe yes, maybe not. But if you call all the related initiative leads together and put their heads together, it might turn out that there was some improvement going on in the IVR menu You know, when you call the call center and then they say press 1 for this, and they try to still get you to service yourself without redirecting you to an agent. Maybe somebody improved that, and that contributed some extra self-service, right? So it's only when you get all of them together and let them put their claims forward, back it up with data, and have a bit of a peer review discussion over there. I call that session a business impact retrospective. Yeah. So as a result of that, you might finally end up with a reconciled estimate of this was the nature of benefits provided for the things that we did as it relates to self-service. Yeah. And this is now impact intelligence. We are more intelligent about the impact that we are having, and this will allow us as in the COOs and the CFOs, to do their next round of investments in a better manner. And if they do so, they will be in a better position to answer investors and shareholders as to what is going on with their money. Because today they are not in a good position to answer that. They have some narratives, but those narratives are not always backed up strongly with numbers. So, you know, you might find fault with my earlier thing because it's a bit of an approximate method. I'm talking about some heuristics, formula, etc. to arrive at those things. And a data scientist might say a much better way of doing all this is to run a controlled experiment, right? You divide your users into 2 cohorts, switch on the AI chatbot for one segment, switch it off for the other, and observe the impact on call volumes. Yes, in theory, that is a much better method. But you imagine any big organization, customer operations is a whole other department. Yeah, your team building the chatbot is under the CDO or somebody. Customer operations is a whole other department. They have a completely different technology stack, a completely different set of vendors. It might be all outsourced. So to put all the sort of connecting logic in place so that you can actually run a controlled experiment across this is a very challenging exercise in a large organization, right? Besides, there is the issue of skill and the data culture, right, and the experimentation infrastructure required. The earlier method, which I call a simple impact attribution, does not require a lot of, it doesn't require any experiment infrastructure. It requires a medium level of skill, and most importantly, when it comes to data culture, that analysis earlier is accessible to business people, because we are not using any statistics or any sophisticated methods. As you're building data culture in your organization, it is important to start with accessible methods that the business stakeholders actually understand. Because otherwise what happens is data scientists start talking about statistical significance, power of the experiment, effect size and so on, and they have lost the business audience. They say, okay, whatever, as long as it matches my intuition, I'm going to accept your recommendations. Otherwise, I'm just, saying, going to set them aside. And it's happening in many places where the data teams are putting out a lot of predictive models, putting out a lot of good suggestions, but they find that a lot of them, which doesn't already match the intuition of the business stakeholders, they're getting set aside. Yeah. So coming back to this, we've seen, so far I've talked about how to address this particular linkage, the linkage from tech delivery to commercial benefit, right? So I've talked about doing attribution, focusing on downstream impact. So I've addressed this part. Now I'll go on to this one, where based on inadequate justifications, work is getting prioritized or funded. And out here, I concede that organizations do have idea triaging processes in place. Yeah, the ideas do get triaged. And after triaging, there are prioritization models in place. There are many prioritization models that people use. But despite this, what I find is certain key questions remain unanswered and work gets funded. And because of that, that hurts the ability to kind of validate benefits later. So what are some of those questions? So out here I've listed a bunch of, I'm not going to read every one of them, I'll let you read it, but I've color coded them in this way. The greens are mostly addressed, they're already addressed as part of your idea prioritization, yeah. The reds are mostly not addressed, and the amber is partially addressed or inadequately addressed, yeah. But if you want to complete the benefits validation loop, and if you want to do the things, the attribution, if you want to do impact attribution and to validate benefits, then I think it is essential that we address all these questions before we start execution. I do get pushback when I talk about these things, yeah. So two types of pushback. The first pushback is, oh, we don't have the data to answer all these questions, right? and we can't spend time figuring out the data for this because we will lose time in the market. We got to release this, it's already delayed, so this is going to slow us down. This is unacceptable. That is one kind of pushback. To which my answer is, this is really a question of speed versus accuracy, right? There is no point gaining speed if there is no accuracy. If you are essentially just flying blind and shooting in the dark, you've got to switch the lights on first, right? I mean, what is the point of, then that's what happens, that's what we call as a feature factory. We're just churning out features without worrying about business impact. So that's the first one. The second pushback is, oh, if you want us to do all this, this is not agile. Agile doesn't work this way, right? Like, this is all like too much upfront effort. Again, I disagree. None of these questions pertain to details of the solution. We are not getting deep into solution design at all. This is still in the realm of justifying the problem. It's partially problem discovery and partially justifying that there are a million competing ideas, each of which requires us to invest business resources. Engineering bandwidth is also a business resource. Everybody's time is essentially business resource. So when we are investing that time and we are picking one idea to the exclusion of other ideas because there is opportunity cost and there are so many ideas, it needs to be justified. It's very reasonable to ask for justification, and I disagree that it's not agile, right? Agile doesn't ask us, say that you jump out of the plane first and then while you are mid-air you figure out how and where you are going to land, right? So it's a misunderstanding of agile for people to say that answering all these questions is not agile. Now all of this, whether to answer those questions or the earlier one, the impact attribution and the downstream impact, all of that is going to require above average measurement capabilities in your organization, and typically that level of measurement is missing. Yeah. So what I say is, only build what you can measure for the most part, right? If you can't measure it, there is no point building it. So this is the traditional flow where we triage and prioritize, build it, and we only have enough measurement to do proximate impact, right? The number of satisfactory chat sessions, or the number of offline viewing hours. We have measurement to do that, but not more. So we can't validate business impact. But nevertheless, based on proximate impact, we call it a success and move on. Yeah, that I think that is that we are out of time for this, right? In the new way, and especially when I explain this to CFOs and COOs, I say this is not free. You got to invest in a measurement improvement program. You got to set aside a separate team who is ready to bridge measurement gaps as and when we detect them, right? So before we prioritize something for execution, we need to ask, do we have the measurements in place? Do we have the capability in place to validate business impact? Do we have the measurement capability in place? If not, you say it's prioritized, but we are going to hold it till the measurement improvement program delivers those measurements. And once they deliver, now we are good to go. We are ready to build it, and then we can actually iterate with respect to downstream impact rather than just proximate impact. So I think I've covered most of the building blocks of impact intelligence that I wanted to share with you. We've talked about visualizing impact with the impact network. We've talked about improving justifications by answering all those questions, improving measurements with the measurement improvement program, and validating impact regularly, proximate impact as well as downstream impact. And when it comes to validating downstream impact, you will most likely need attribution, because downstream impact depends on a number of variables. So you'll have to use some kind of attribution mechanism. And when we do all this, we will have expected benefit, actual benefit, all those things in place for every initiative, which allows us to calculate some very interesting metrics. Yeah? And those metrics can be used to better inform the next round of investments. So I call this particular metric as the benefits realization ratio. It's a ratio of actual benefits to expected benefits. Yeah? And there are some examples here for proximate as well as downstream impact. So let's take the AI chatbot for example, right? The expectation was that it will save 30% of your chat sessions are going to be satisfactory, and in truth it turned out to be 30%, so your benefits realization ratio is 100%. When it comes to downstream impact though, the expectation was it's going to save 8% call volume, right? Whereas if you do all this and it turns out that it saved 7.2% call volume, then your benefits realization ratio is 90%. Yeah. So this is not ROI. It's not as good as ROI, but ROI is very difficult, and therefore hardly anybody does ROI at an initiative level. because ROI is in dollar terms and it's benefits divided by costs. You have to have a good accounting of costs as well, right, and benefits. Whereas this is ROP, it's return on projection. It's not in dollar terms and it doesn't involve costs. It's just a kind of say-do ratio. You know, we said we'll get so much benefit by doing this, this metric will move by this much. In actuality, it moved by this much, and that's your benefits realization ratio, right? So you can do this, calculate this on a per initiative basis and then aggregate it at a portfolio level by doing the appropriate weightages as well. Yeah, that's I think pretty much I wanted to say on this particular thing. Yeah. So I want to come back and say that I've been talking a lot about impact and outcome, but I'm not saying process is not important. I'm just saying we need to strike a balance between the focus on process and the focus on outcomes, right? And I think over the last 10 years or so, with lean and agile and so on, and especially this being an agile conference, I think it's pertinent to say that we have probably over-indexed a little bit on the process side, and it's maybe time to kind of restore the balance a little bit on the other side as well. Having said that, I'm recognizing there are risks of going too much on either side, right? I've just listed those risks. I won't go into it now. I just got a 10-minute warning. So those modules, the things that I talked about there, you can take them up individually and still get the benefits, but I've gone ahead and tied them all together into a framework with 8 modules. There are these 3 you can start with visualization, or you can start with justification, or you can start with just demonstrating proximate impact. I've had clients over the years who have started with all 3 of this. And then you can move on to the more advanced modules. But when all of this is in place, basically what you will see happening is that ideas, initiatives or feature requests, they are proposed via stronger justifications that I call business case 2.0, which are then vetted by the investment decision makers or by your demand management team, and they are prioritized. But prior to execution, we make sure that the measurements are in place. If not, the measurement improvement team kicks in, puts the measurements in place. Once execution begins and your releases start flowing out, you demonstrate proximate impact, and once a quarter, the person in charge of the key business metric over there, they convene a business impact retrospective and they say, I have noticed this metric moved by X% last quarter, who's responsible for it? Please come and claim credit, but back it up with data, and we want to make sure that the claims add up, right? Because otherwise today what happens is everybody, there are like 10 contributing initiatives to this metric, everybody claims full credit for that, right? So it doesn't add up. And by doing all this, we end up with a couple of performance metrics. I shared one benefits realization ratio, but there are a couple of others in the book, and also the details of the attribution, how to go about the attribution calculations, the details are there in the book if you're interested. But they give us a couple of metrics that we can then use to kind of more informed investment decisions as we go along. So this whole thing can typically only be put in place by a CFO or COO, whoever is signing the checks, because it cuts across departments, right? It cuts across product, technology, data, and also all business functions, because the initiatives, the ideas for initiatives might come from sales, marketing, operations, fulfillment, you name it. So to put something in place that cuts across all of this, you need somebody like a CEO or a CFO, right? But that said, if you are some other CXO, or if you are in a department that reports to some other CXO, there are still benefits. Business CXOs typically feel that, they always feel that their initiatives are not getting prioritized, their colleagues' initiatives are getting prioritized. Yeah, they feel that they have their own grievances, but this gives them a level playing field. Product people, they have to deal with demand from 10 different business stakeholders, and they have to explain their prioritization decisions. Everybody has a grievance that you did not prioritize what I wanted, right? But with the justification, with those answers in place, you can better justify why you prioritize one over the other. And also I have seen with those questions in place, the demand tends to go down a little, because as people start answering those questions, they begin to self-censor them. So they realize that they don't have such a strong case for pushing for this idea, right? If you are a data leader, I explained this earlier, right? Sometimes you have teams who are putting out great models, but the business is not always like too excited about it, especially if it doesn't match their intuition. But when you start participating in this process, and when you start participating in attribution, especially the advanced methods of attribution, what happens is your teams are actually playing a part in scoring business performance. That improves their stature within the organization. And once and that has like positive side effects to their acceptance for the prediction models as well. And finally, if you are a CTO, CDO, CIO, or a Chief Transformation Officer, you are subject to that spray and pray trap, where you have demand coming in from the business that's like 3x your capacity, yeah, and you're always under, last year you delivered 10 programs, this year the expectation is you deliver 12 programs with the same headcount, right? You're constantly under pressure, and you're effectively functioning in a feature factory mode if you don't have the line of sight to business impact. So with this, you will gain a bit of line of sight to business impact. You'll be able to avoid the spray and pray trap. And for your own tech initiatives like a cloud migration or a legacy modernization, you'll be able to adopt this method and talk about the success of technology initiatives, not just in technology terms, but in business terms. 5 minutes. Okay, I'll stop here. I think I had a couple of other things. I'll maybe skip this one. I had a word on AI because that's mandatory, but I'll skip it. But this is, I'll end with this. This is an AI generated image to boot. But this is like an analogy to sum it up. Yeah, this is a screenshot from an imaginary video game where it's the players are the shooters. They have to shoot at these goblins that you can see in a foggy landscape, and when they shoot, they win some gold. But the problem is it might take multiple shots to hit, and it's a foggy landscape, so you don't know always whether you have hit a goblin or not. And if you get too close, the goblins disappear, and your opportunity to win the gold also disappears. Yeah, so that's the game. And now there are upgrades available. As you begin to gain gold, you can buy upgrades. Yeah, you can buy better guns, better ammunition, etc. But there is one particular upgrade that people fail to notice, and that upgrade is fog piercing vision. And that's a bit expensive, but if you buy that upgrade, then you now suddenly have clear line of sight to your target. And accuracy can improve much more. So people who realize that and buy into that upgrade, they tend to win the game. This is what is playing out in the world of initiatives, where our line of sight to business impact is not clear, right? And the upgrade that I'm suggesting is this impact, everything that I talked about in terms of impact intelligence. It's not a very expensive upgrade if you do things like simple impact attribution, right? You don't have to go all the way to controlled experiments for proximate and down for every kind of thing, right? But instead of that, instead of investing in this, because it takes agreement of so many stakeholders and so on, instead of investing in this, what we do instead is we invest in other upgrades like more powerful guns and ammunition, which is more developers, more tools, more, how can we improve productivity? All the conversation is around productivity and so on. I think it's missing the mark, right? So instead, if we kind of consider this and try to go in this direction, I think today, funding is scarce, and the more we can adapt to this, we can grow impact intelligence, explain our outcomes to investors and shareholders better, because it's what we need today, right? Funding is scarce, and like it kind of reflecting in the conference here, right? I think compared to earlier years, there are fewer people in this room. So those are the times that we are dealing with, right? So I hope that we can consider some of these things and then put it to use, and by doing this, I think we can become more happy in terms of that, okay, we truly can see that we are delivering business impact. CFO and COO can become more happy that, okay, the things that I am approving is being put to good use, and ultimately the investors and shareholders are also reassured that, okay, yeah, I'm getting some returns for what I'm doing, right? So all around happiness, what more can we ask for? Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Sriram. Hope everyone had a great takeaway from this session. Cool. Time for quick questions, if anyone has questions. Right there in the back.
Hi, Sriram. This is Sandeep. First and foremost, thank you for putting it up so simply. I think this was crisp and easily, someone can take it away. My question to you is, with your experience of getting this implemented, how has been the aspect of getting into the analysis paralysis when you actually bring in some kind of a this kind of a framework? There are a lot of times when the people are putting into the details, filling in all the blocks that you have shown, people tend to get into the analysis paralysis. So how have you experienced those, and what has been your experience of now dealing with those?
Well, typically, anything like this, even if a CEO or COO, whenever they get convinced, they start small. They say, let's try it for this part of the portfolio here, because this is contributing to a metric that I care about the most, right? Or where people are more willing to try this out. So you anyway starting small, right? So it's important to start small, and important to start with the people who are somewhat bought into this. If people are too resistant to this, then not starting off on a great note. So when you do that, I think then it kind of smoothens the path for further.
Any other questions?
Question about your return on projection metric. How do you end up using that?
Sorry?
How do you use that return on projection? What do you do with it?
Okay, that will take a little bit of, can I address that offline? Yeah, but in short, if it's the same initiative that's continuing, right? Like, because some initiatives are multi-year initiatives. So when it's asked for another round of funding, right, continuing its funding, you can look at its own benefits realization ratio, saying, okay, this is what you promised, this is what is delivered. Is it still worth to the business? Is this ratio, if it's 70%, is it still worth to the business, right? That is one. Second, you can aggregate it after weighting, because these apply to different metrics. You can't simply average them. You have to do a weighted average for the portfolio. If you do a weighted average for a portfolio, and if you're in a situation where you are having to allocate budget across portfolios and having to choose which portfolio gets how much, then the aggregated metric serves as a data point for making that decision. Plus, there is another metric that I have not talked about here, but I'm happy to talk about offline later, which also helps as part of this process.
I guess the question would be, how do you know whether the error was in the projection or the implementation?
Doesn't matter, because the business, it was funded on the basis that we are investing so much, yeah, because we believe that we are going to get this much, yeah. So the learning mechanism happens during the retrospective, whether it was in the projection or in the implementation. The learning can be carried forward anyway, organically, but as far as investment decision making goes, that isn't pertinent. Yes. Sorry, I'm taking away time from your...
That's cool.
Thank you. The session was really wonderful, and there was so much to learn from it. As I was listening to your session, I had a couple of questions, but I'll just ask one in the interest of time.
And we can do the later.
Yes, definitely. So it's related to the one that was asked. So we are talking about moving away from ROI, the dollar value, to a ratio. Mm-hmm. But how do you see that investors would be interested in something from a ratio perspective rather than just dollar value, and so forth goes for even the CFOs, etc., who are now increasingly, with a lot of costs and revenue being questioned, interested in the dollar value?
Sure, but my point is that if you're able to do ROI, ignore all this, just continue with ROI. My point is, people are not able to do ROI today. They are not, for most initiatives, there is no ROI and no credible ROI. Yeah. If you are already able to do ROI, you don't need any of this. You can use ROI for that.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Sriram.